Oh my god, you would not believe how long it took me to get this book. Hello, this is Chiak, and finally starting the another cold reading series. As I said, I was going to, have read this book before, but I'm reading it again. It's been a really long time. I'm reading again because it is the only book that I have in my memory that made me so annoyed that I want to throw it against a wall. So I want to see, can I rekindle that feeling? But yeah, I ordered this book June 3rd, and through many revisits to to chapters Indigo, finding out that their shipping company that they use had lost the original package, and they had to get the only book existing in Canada to ship to the store that I need to pick it up in. We finally got it. It just took more than a month. Um, yeah, this book may be cursed, but either way, finally I can get on with another cold reading series. I've been itching to be able to start reading again, even if it is basically this is a re-novelization of the video game. So if you've played the video game, you probably know what's going to happen, or at least I think there is an author's note that I'm going to read. So, Resident Evil, Volume 6, Code Veronica. I really hope that my voice is loud enough. And first, the author's notes. Faithful readers of this series have probably already read this note, but please allow me to repeat myself. You may notice time and/or character discrepancies between the books and the games, or the books and the books for that matter. With the games, comics, and novelizations being written, revised, and produced at different times and by different people, complete consistency is nearly impossible. I can only apologize on behalf of us all and hope that, in spite of chronological errors, you will continue to enjoy the mix of corporate zombies and hapless heroes that makes Resident Evil so much fun to write and, if I'm lucky, to read. Prologue. Faced with his imminent death, surrounded by the diseased and dying as pieces of flaming helicopter rained down from the skies, all Rodrigo Juan Raval could think about was the girl. That and getting the hell out of the way. She'll die too. Move. He dove for cover behind an unmarked tombstone as the small cemetery rumbled and shook. With a shattering metal sound of high impact, a massive chunk of smoking copter crashed into the far corner of the yard, spraying the nearest rotting prisoners and soldiers with burning fuel. Sorry, I'm just gonna move my audio up a titch there. With a shattering metal sound of high impact, a massive chunk of smoking copter crashed into the far corner of the yard, spraying the nearest rotting prisoners and soldiers with burning fuel. Bright, oily streamers of it spattered across the ground like sticky lava. And when Rodrigo hit the dirt, he felt a tremendous bolt of pain in his gut, two of his ribs cracking against a weed-buried slab of dark marble. The pain was sudden and terrible, paralyzing. The pain was sudden and terrible, paralyzing, but he somehow managed not to pass out. He couldn't afford to. A rotor blade knifed into the dirt barely 2 feet from him, spraying sandy earth into the evening sky. He heard a new chorus of wordless moans, the virus carriers protesting the rain of fire. An infected guard shambled by, his hair blazing like a torch, his eyes sightless and searching. They don't feel it. Don't feel a thing, Rodrigo desperately reminded himself, concentrating on his breathing, afraid to move as the pain edged from shrieking to mere shouting. Not human anymore. The air was thick with dizzying fumes and the smells of rapid decay and burning meat. He heard a few gunshots somewhere else in the prison compound, but only a few, but only a few. The battle was over, and they had all lost. Rodrigo closed his eyes for as long as he dared, fairly certain that he would never see another sunrise. Talk about having a crappy day. It had all started only 10 days before, in Paris. The Redfield girl had infiltrated HQ admin and had put up one hell of a vicious fight before Rodrigo himself had gotten the draw on her. The truth was, he'd been lucky. She pulled her piece and come up empty. Yeah, real lucky, he thought bitterly. If he'd known what the immediate future was going to hold, he might have reloaded for her. The reward for catching her alive, a chance to take his elite security units through their paces with real living viral carriers out at the Rockfort facility, the compound on a remote island in the southern Atlantic. The girl would end up a new test subject for the scientists, or maybe bait for her troublesome brother and his hayseed stars rebellion Rodrigo kept hearing rumors about. 17 people had been seriously injured by Redfield's dance through HQ admin, 5 more dead. Most of them were sleazy suits. Rodrigo hadn't given half a shit about any of them, but catching the girl meant he could look forward to a serious pay hike. Umbrella could turn her into a giant neon cockroach for all he cared. They'd certainly done worse. Lucky again, it seemed. He had 10 days to ready his troops. 10 days while the HQ interrogators unsuccessfully questioned the girl. The journey from Paris to Cape Town to Rockfort had been a piece of cake. The pilots were all top notch, and the girl had wisely kept her trap shut. All of his men had been psyched for the opportunity, the mood high as they touched down and started to prep for the first drills. And then, less than 8 hours after reaching the island, only the second time he'd ever been there, the compound had been brutally attacked by persons unknown. A precision airstrike from out of the blue. Corporate financing, definitely razor technology, and seemingly unlimited supplies of ammo. The copters and planes had rolled overhead like a thundering black nightmare. The attack well planned and merciless. As far as he could tell, everything was hit. The prison, the labs, the training facility. He thought the Ashford house might have been spared, but he wouldn't bet on it. The strike was devastating enough, but it was almost immediately trumped by what came next. The destroyed hot zone lab leaked out a half dozen variations on the T virus, and a number of experimental bioorganics had escaped. The T series turned humans into brain-fried cannibals, and an unfortunate side effect, but it hadn't been created for people. Through the questionable miracles of modern science, most of the new weapon subjects weren't even remotely human, and the virus turned them into killing machines. Chaos had ensued. The base commander, that creepy maniac Alfred Ashford, hadn't done a damn thing to organize, so it had been up to the ranking soldiers to lead. The prisoners were obviously useless, but there had been enough grunts on the ground to launch a tremendously unsuccessful defense and counterattack. His own boys had fallen as quickly as the rest of them, wiped out on their way to the heliport by a trio of OR1s, the current T-virus breed of choice. All that training, lost in just a minute or two. The OR1s were particularly nasty, violently aggressive and extremely powerful. Fortunately, only a few of those had escaped. But then, a few was all it took. Bandersnatches, the grunts called them, because of the long reach. Funny that his team had been so careful to avoid Funny that his team had been so careful to avoid infection, donning custom filter masks even as the first bombs hit, and yet they were taken out by a form of the virus anyway. At least it was over fast, before they even knew how much trouble they were in, he thought, envying them their hope. He hurt, he was exhausted, and he'd seen things that he knew would haunt him for the rest of his life, however long that might turn out to be. They were the lucky ones. Rockfort had become a hell on Earth. The man-made virus was a short-lived airborne and had dispersed quickly, only affecting about half of the island's population. But the new carriers had promptly chomped down on most of the other half, spreading the disease. Some had escaped early on, but between the infected and the freed BOWs, getting out had become a bleak option. The entire island was overrun. Maybe that's the way it should be. Maybe we all got what we deserved. Rodrigo knew he wasn't an evil man, but he didn't kid himself. He wasn't exactly one of the good guys either. He turned a blind eye to some very bad shit in exchange for some very good pay, and as much as he'd like to shift the blame around, he couldn't deny his own small part in the apocalypse that now surrounded him. Umbrella had been playing with fire, but even after Raccoon City had gone down, even after the disasters at Caliban Cove and the underground facility, he'd never really considered that something might happen to him or his team. Another walking corpse wandered past his temporary shelter. A reasonably fresh shotgun blast where his jaw should have been. Rodrigo instinctively ducked lower and again had to struggle not to pass out, the fresh pain shockingly intense. He'd broken ribs before. This was something else. Something internal. Liver laceration, maybe. A sure killer if he didn't get help. Assuming his amazingly bad lucky streak held up, he'd bleed out internally before something ate him. His thoughts were wandering. The pain had gone deep, and as much as he wanted to rest, there was the girl. He couldn't forget about her. He was close now. So close. One of the guards had knocked her unconscious before she got her physical exam or prison issue, and that had been just before the attack. She should still be in the isolation cell, the underground entrance just past the flaming helicopter debris. Almost finished now. Then I can rest. Most of the barely human virus carriers had moved away from the fiery crash, following some primal instinct, perhaps. He lost his weapon somewhere along the way, but if he ran behind the standing headstones at the west wall, Rodrigo eased himself into a sitting position. The pain getting worse, making him feel nauseous and weak. There should be a bottle of hemostatic liquid in the holding area's first aid kit, which would at least slow any internal hemorrhaging, although he thought he was prepared to accept death as much as anyone could be prepared. But not until I get to the girl. I captured her. I brought her here. My fault, and if I die, she dies too. In spite of all the horror he'd witnessed that day, the comrades he'd lost and the constant gnawing terror of suffering a truly ghastly death, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Claire Redfield had blood on her hands, true, but not on purpose. Not like Umbrella. not like him. She hadn't killed for greed. She hadn't made him disregard his own consciousness for all those years, and having watched his elite team turned into spaghetti by honest-to-God monsters, having spent the afternoon fighting for his life, it had become clear that trying to bring Umbrella to justice was what good guys did. The girl deserved something for that, even if only not to die alone in the dark. And it just so happened that he had a set of keys taken from the dead warden's belt loop, one of which would surely fit her cell door. Sparks flared up into the darkening sky from the flaming wreckage, tiny bright insects bursting into nothing, occasionally falling on one of the closer zombies and sizzling into their gray flesh before dying out. They didn't care. Rodrigo gritted his teeth and stumbled to his feet, aware that the young Claire probably wouldn't last 10 minutes on her own, knowing that he meant to give her the chance. It wasn't the least he could do. It was simply the only thing left. Excuse me. Chapter 1. Claire's head hurt. She'd been half dreaming, remembering things, until the faraway sound of thunder crowded through the dark, pulling her closer to wakefulness. She dreamed about the insanity that had become her life over the past few months. And even though an almost conscious part of her knew it was reality, it still seemed too incredible to be true. Flashes of what had happened in post-viral Raccoon City kept rising up. Images of the inhuman creature that had stalked her and the little girl through the devastation. Memories of the Birkin family, of meeting Leon, of praying that Chris was all right. Thunder again, louder. And she realized that something was wrong, but she couldn't seem to wake up, to stop remembering. Chris. Her brother had gone underground in Europe, and they had followed, and now she was cold and her head hurt, but she didn't know why. What happened? She concentrated, but it would only come in pieces, pictures and thoughts from the weeks since Raccoon City. She couldn't seem to control the memories. It was like watching a movie in a dream, and still she couldn't wake up. Images of Trent on the plain, in the desert, finding a disk of codes that had ultimately proved useless to her brother's cause. The long flight to London, the hop to France, a telephone call. Chris is here, he's fine. Barry's Burden's voice, deep and friendly, laughing, the incredible relief filling her up, feeling Leon's hand on her shoulder. It was a start, and it led her to the next clear recollection. A meeting had been set up, one of the surveillance posts from the HQ admin wing on Umbrella's grounds. Leon and the others were waiting in the van. Checking my watch, heart pounding with excitement. Where is he? Where's Chris? Claire didn't know she was screwed until the first bullets ripped past, chasing her onto the spotlight-riddled grounds, into a building. Running through the corridors, deafened by the rattle of atomic weapons, running through the corridors, deafened by the rattle of automatic weapons, and the helicopter outside. Running, bullets chipping by close enough to send sharpened slivers of floor tile into the meat of my calves, and an explosion. Armed soldiers writhing in the blast's fury, and I got caught. They held her for over a week. trying everything they could to make her talk. She'd talk, too, about going fishing with Chris, political ideology, her favorite bands. When it came down to it, she didn't know anything vital. She was looking for her brother. That was all. And she somehow managed to convince them that she didn't know anything important about Umbrella. It probably helped that she was 19 and looked about as deadly as a Girl Scout. What little, what little she actually did know, things about the Umbrella insider Trent, or the whereabouts of Sherry Birkin, the scientist's daughter, she buried deep and left there. When they realized she was useless as an informant, she'd been taken away. Cuffed, scared. 2 private planes and a helicopter later, the island. She didn't even see it. They put a hood over her face, the stifling blackness only adding to her fear. Rockfort Island. Wasn't that what the pilot called it? It was a long way from Paris, but that was the extent of her knowledge. Thunder. There was a sound of thunder. She remembered being pushed through a muddy prison cemetery in the gray morning, catching a glimpse through her stifling hood of the graves, marked with elaborate headstones. Down some stairs. Welcome to your new home, and boom. The ground was shaking, rumbling. Claire opened her eyes just in time to see the one overhead light go out. The thick metal bars of her cell suddenly imprinted in negative and floating off to her left in the pitch black. She lay on her side on the clammy, dirty floor. Not good. Nope. He better get up. Steeling herself against the pounding of her skull, she crawled to her knees, her muscles stiff and sore. The blackness of the cold, dank room was very still, except for the sound of water dripping, a slow and lonely sound. It appeared she was alone. Not for long. Oh man, I'm in it deep now. Umbrella had her, and considering the havoc she created back in Paris, it was unlikely that they were going to treat her to ice cream and send her on her way. The renewed awareness of her situation knotted her stomach, but she did her best to put the fear aside. She needed to think straight, to figure out her options, and she needed to be ready to act. She wouldn't have survived Raccoon City if she'd given in to panic. Except you're on an island run by Umbrella. Even if you get past the guards, where can you possibly go? One predicament at a time. First thing, she should probably try to stand up. Except for the painful lump at her right temple from the asshole who knocked her out, she didn't think she'd been injured. There was another rumble, muffled and far away, and a bit of rock dust drifted down from above. She could feel it on the back of her neck. She had integrated the rumbling sounds into her half-conscious dreams as thunder. But it definitely sounded like heavy artillery had come to Rockfort. Or Godzilla. What the hell was going on out there? She crept to her feet, wincing at her rifle butt headache as she brushed the dust off her bare arms, stretching chilled muscles. The underground room was making her wish she'd worn something warmer than jeans and a cut-off vest for her meeting with Chris. Chris, oh, please be safe. In Paris, she deliberately led the Umbrella security team away from Leon and the others, Rebecca and the 2 Exeter stars. If Chris hadn't also been caught, Claire figured he'd have hooked up with the team by now. If she could get to a computer with an uplink, she should be able to send a message to Leon. Yeah, just bend those steel bars, find a couple of machine guns, and mow down the population of the island. Oh, then hack into a tightly secured relay system, assuming you can find an unmanned computer. Also, you can tell Leon that you don't actually know where Rockfort is. The louder internal voice cut in. Think positive, damn it. You can be sarcastic later, assuming you survive. What do you have to work with? Good question. There was no guard, for one thing. It was also extremely dark, a bare hint of light coming from somewhere off to the right, which could be an advantage if... Claire patted her pocket suddenly, wildly hoping that no one had searched her when she'd been unconscious, sure that someone must have left inside the vest pocket. There it was. Idiots, she whispered, pulling out the old metal lighter that Chris had given her a while back, the comforting weight of it warm in her hand. When they patted her down for weapons, a soldier reeking of tobacco had taken it out, but given it back to her when she'd said that she smoked. Claire put the lighter back in her pocket, not wanting to blind herself now that her eyes were getting used to the dark. There was enough ambient light for her to make out most of the small room. A desk and a couple of cabinets directly across from her cell. An open door to the left, the same door she'd entered by. A chair and some miscellaneous crap stacked off to the right. Okay, good. You know the environment. What else you got? Thankfully, her inner voice was a lot calmer than she was. She quickly went through her other pockets, turning up a couple of ponytail elastics and 2 breath mints in a crumpled roll. Terrific. Unless she wanted to take on the enemy with a very small, refreshingly peppermint slingshot, she was shit out of luck. Footsteps in the corridor outside the cell room, coming closer. Her muscles tensed and her mouth went dry. She was unarmed and trapped, in the way a few of those guards had been looking at her on the transport. Bring it on. I'm unarmed maybe, but I'm not defenseless. If someone meant to assault her, sexually or otherwise, she'd make a point of doing some major damage in return. If she was going to die anyway, she didn't plan on going out alone. Thump, thump. There was only one person out there. She decided, and whoever it was, he or she was hurting. The steps were erratic and slow, shuffling almost like... No way. Claire held her breath as a lone male figure stepped haltingly into the room, his arms out in front of him. He moved like one of the virus zombies, like a drunk, reeling and unsteady, and immediately staggered for the door to her cell. Reflexively, Claire backed away, terrified at the implications. If there'd been some kind of viral outbreak on the island, at best she'd end up starving to death behind bars. And Jesus, another spill? Thousands had died in Raccoon City. When would Umbrella learn that their insane biological experiments weren't worth the cost? She had to see. If it was a drunk guard, at least he was alone. She might be able to take him. And if it was a carrier, she was safe for the moment. Probably. They couldn't operate doors, or at least the ones in Raccoon City. They couldn't operate doors, or at least the ones in Raccoon hadn't been able to. She took out the lighter, flipped the top, and thumbed the wheel. Claire recognized him instantly and gasped, taking another step back. Tall and well-built, Hispanic perhaps, a mustache and dark, merciless eyes. It was the man who caught her back in Paris, who had escorted her to the island. Not a zombie. At least there's that. Not much of a relief, but she'd taken whatever she could get. She stood for a moment, frozen, not sure what to expect. He looked different, and it was more than his dirt-smeared face or the small bloodstains on his white t-shirt. It was as though there had been some fundamental internal change. The way his expression was set. Before, he looked like a stoned killer. Now she wasn't sure. and when he reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys, she prayed that he'd changed for the better. Without a word, he pulled the cell door open and blankly met her gaze before jerking his head to one side, the universal sign for get out, if there was such a thing. Before she could act, he turned and staggered away, definitely injured from the way he held his gut with one shaking hand. There was a chair between the desk and the far wall. He sat down heavily and picked up a small bottle from the desktop with blood-stained fingers. He shook the bottle, about the size of a small spool of thread, before weakly throwing it across the room, muttering to himself, "Perfect." The presumably empty bottle clattered across the cement floor, rolling to a stop just outside the cell. He glanced in her direction, tiredly, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Go on. Get out of here." Claire took a step toward the open cell door and hesitated, wondering if it was some kind of trick. Being shot trying to escape crossed her mind. Being shot trying to escape crossed her mind, and didn't seem all that far-fetched, considering who he worked for. She still clearly remembered the look in his eyes when he shoved that gun in her face, the cold sneer that had twisted his mouth. She cleared her throat nervously, deciding to probe for an explanation. "What are you telling me exactly?" "You're free," he said, muttering to himself again as he sank deeper into the chair, chin lowering to his chest. "I don't know. Might have been some kind of special forces team. Troops were all wiped out. No chance of escape." He closed his eyes. Her instincts told her that he really meant to let her go, but she wasn't going to take any chances. She stepped out of the cell and picked up the bottle he'd thrown, moving very slowly, watching him carefully as she approached. She didn't think his wounded act was a fake. He looked like hell, an ashy white pallor over his dark skin, like a transparent mask. He wasn't breathing all that evenly either, and his clothes smelled like sweat and chemical smoke. She glanced at the bottle, an empty syringe vial with an unpronounceable name on the label, catching the word hemostatic in the fine print. Hemo was blood. Some kind of bleeding stabilizer? Maybe an internal injury? She wanted to ask him why he was releasing her, what the situation was outside, where she should go, but she could see that he was on the verge of passing out, his eyelids fluttering. "I can't just walk out, not without trying to help him." "Screw that. Go now." "He might die." "You might run. You might die. Run for it." The internal dispute was brief, but her conscience triumphed over reason, as usual. He obviously hadn't set her loose because of some personal infinity. But whatever the reason, she was grateful. He didn't have to let her go, and he'd done it anyway. "What about you?" she asked, wondering if there was anything she could do for him. She certainly couldn't carry him out, and she was no medic. "Don't worry about me," he said, raising his head to glare at her for a second, sounding irritated that she'd even brought it up. Before she could ask him what had happened outside, he lost consciousness, his shoulders slumping, his body growing still. He was breathing, but without a doctor, she wouldn't want to bet on how long. The lighter was getting hot, but she endured the heat long enough to search the small room. Starting with the desk, there was a combat knife thrown casually on the blotter, a number of loose papers. She saw her own name on one of them and scanned the document while fixing the knife sheath to her waistband. Claire Redfield. prisoner number WKD 4496. Date of transfer, blah blah blah. Escorted by Rodrigo Juan Raval, 3rd Security Unit, CO, Umbrella Medical, Paris. Rodrigo. The man who caught her and set her free now appeared to be dying right in front of her. She couldn't do anything about it. She couldn't do anything about it either, not unless she could find help. Which I can't do down here, she thought, snapping the overheated lighter closed after she finished the rest of her search. Nothing but junk, mostly. A trunk of musty prisoner uniforms, endless stacks of paperwork stuffed into the desk. She found the pair of fingerless gloves they'd taken from her old riding gloves, and put them on, grateful for the minor warmth they provided. All she had to defend herself with was the combat knife, a deadly weapon in the right hands, which, unfortunately, hers wasn't. It's a gift horse. Don't complain. 5 minutes ago you were unarmed and locked up. At least now you have a chance. You should just be happy that Rodrigo didn't come down here to put you out of your misery. Still, she pretty much sucked at knife play. After a brief hesitation, she quickly patted Rodrigo down, but he wasn't carrying. She did find a set of keys but didn't take them, not wanting to carry anything that might draw someone's attention by jangling at the wrong moment. If she needed them, she could come back. Time to blow this popsicle stand. See what there is to see out there. Let's do it, she said softly, as much to get herself moving as anything else, aware that she was basically terrified of what she might find, and also that she didn't have a choice in the matter. As long as she was on the island, Umbrella still had her, and until she assessed the circumstances, she couldn't make plans to escape. Holding the knife tightly, Claire stepped out of the cellar room, wondering if Umbrella's madness would ever end. Alone, Alfred Ashford sat on the... Alone, Alfred Ashford sat on the wide, sweeping stairs of his home, half blind with rage. The destruction had finally ceased raining down from the skies, but his home had been damaged. Their home. It had been built for his grandfather's great-grandmother, the brilliant and beautiful Veronica, God rest her soul, on the isolated oasis that she had named Rockfort, where she had made a magical life for herself and her progeny over the generations. And now, in the blink of an eye, some horrible fanatic group had dared to try and destroy it. Most of the second-floor architecture had been warped and twisted. Doors crushed shut, only their private rooms left whole. Uncouth, uncultured miscreants. They can't even fathom the measure of their own ignorance. Alexia was weeping upstairs, her delicate rose of a heart surely aching with the loss. Mere thought of his sister's needless pain fueled his rage to greater intensity, making him want to strike out. But there was no one to submit to his anger. All the commanding officers and chief scientists dead, even his own personal staff. He'd watched it happen from the safety of the private mansion's secret monitor room, each tiny screen telling a different story of brutal suffering and pathetic incompetence. Almost everyone had died, and the rest had run like frightened rabbits. Most of the island's planes were already gone. His personal cook had been the only survivor in the common receiving mansion, but she screamed so much that he himself had been forced to shoot her. We're still here, though, safe from the unwashed hands of the world. The Ashfords will survive and prosper, to dance on the graves of our adversaries, to drink champagne from the skulls of their children. He imagined dancing with Alexia, holding her close, waltzing to the dynamic music of their enemies' tortured screams. It would be nothing short of bliss. His twin's gaze locked to his, sharing the awareness of their superiority over the common man, over the stupidity of those who sought to destroy them. The question was, who had been responsible for the attack? Umbrella had many enemies, from legitimate rival pharmaceutical companies to private shareholders. The loss of Raccoon City had been disastrous for the market. To the few closet competitors of White Umbrella, their covert bioweapons research department, Umbrella Pharmaceutical, the brainchild of Lord Oswald Spencer and Alfred's own grandfather, Edward Ashford, was extremely lucrative, an industrial empire. But the real power lay with Umbrella's clandestine activities, the operations of which had become too vast to remain entirely unnoticed. And there were spies everywhere. Alfred clenched his fists, frustrated. His entire body a live wire furious tension, and was suddenly aware of Alexia's presence behind him. A trace of gardenia, a trace of gardenia in the air. He'd been so intent on his emotional chaos that he hadn't even heard her approach. "You mustn't let yourself despair, my brother," she said gently, and stepped down to sit beside him. "We will prevail. We always have." She knew him so well. When she'd been away from Rockfort all those years ago, he'd been so lonely, so afraid that they might lose some of their special connection. But if anything, they were closer now. They were closer now than ever before. They never spoke about their separation, about the things that had happened after the experiments at the Antarctic facility. Both of them just so happy to be together that they would say nothing to spoil it. She felt the same way, he was certain. He gazed at her for long seconds, soothed by her graceful presence. Astounded as always by the depths of her beauty. If he hadn't heard her weeping in her bedroom, he wouldn't have known that she'd shed a tear. Her porcelain skin was radiant, her sky blue eyes clear and shining. Even today, this darkest of days, the very sight of her gave him such pleasure. "What would I do without you?" Alfred asked softly, knowing that the answer was too painful to consider. He'd gone half mad with loneliness when she'd been away, and sometimes still had strange episodes, nightmares that he was alone, that Alexia had left him. It was one of the reasons he encouraged her never to leave their heavily secured private residence, located behind the visitor mansion. She didn't mind. She had her studies and was aware that she was too important, too exquisite to be admired by just anyone. Quite content to be sustained by her brother's affections, trusting him to be her sole contact with the outside world. If only I could stay with her all the time, just the two of us, hidden away. But no, he was an Ashford, responsible for the Ashford stake in Umbrella, accountable for the entire Rockfort compound. When their basically incompetent father, Alexander Ashford, had gone missing some 15 years before, the young Alfred had stepped up to take his place. The key players behind Umbrella's bioweapons research had tried to keep him out of the loop, but only because he intimidated them, cowed them by the natural supremacy of his family name. Now they sent him regular reports, respectfully explaining the decisions they made on such explaining the decisions they made on his behalf, making it clear that they would get in touch with him immediately if the need arose. I suppose I should contact them, tell them what's happened. He'd always left those matters to his personal secretary, Robert Dorson, but Robert had left his service some weeks before to join the other prisoners after expressing a bit too much curiosity about Alexia. She was smiling at him now, her face glowing with understanding and adoration. Yes, she was so much better to him since her return to Rockfort, truly as devoted to him as he'd always been to her. "You'll protect me, won't you?" she said. Not a question. "You'll find out who did this to us, and then show them what one gets for trying to destroy a legacy as powerful as ours." Overcome with love, Alfred reached out to touch her but stopped short, all too aware that she didn't like physical contact. He nodded instead, some of his rage returning as he thought of someone trying to harm his beloved Alexia. Never, not as long as he lived, would he allow that to happen. "Yes, Alexia," he said passionately. "I'll make them suffer. I swear it." He could see in her eyes that she believed in him, and his heart filled with pride, just as his thoughts turned to the discovery of their enemy. An absolute hatred for Rockfort's assailants was growing inside of him, for the stain of weakness they had tried to paint on the Ashford name. "I'll teach them regret, Alexia, and they'll never forget the lesson." His sister relied on him. Alfred would die before letting her down. Okay. So, excuse me since I literally just got this book today and I just wanted to quickly get into the reading it. Yeah, I'm gonna keep it just the prologue in chapter 1 for now until I can actually have a look through how the chapters are sparsed out so I can get an idea. But this cold reading series is just going to be on Fridays because this is not a huge book like Solo Leveling. So I could just keep it to Friday schedule, but hopefully I can also read for longer after I figure out how many chapters how big the chapters are as well. That's my other concern. But either way, it's very warm right now. So thank you for liking if you liked. Thank you for commenting if you commented. Thank you for subscribing if you subscribed. Thank you for favoriting if you favorited. Thank you for simply clicking on this video. Tell me how the volume is. Since it's been some time since I've done the cold reading session. I mean, I don't think I have to adjust too much between just my regular live streams or not, but just in case. Until next time, guys. See ya. Oh my god. My voice cracked. My voice is already getting dry. It's the summer heat. Slowly.